All right, welcome back for part two on Bits on Pieces. Turn It On Again by Genesis. In the veins of talking about all the rich chord progressions in the song on piano, last episode, this episode we're gonna shift gears and focus more on the rhythm patterns and the various time signature changes that are in the song. This is not your average, four beat on the floor kind of thing. This song has a lot more going for it. So we're gonna get started right away. Russ,
Yeah, I'll take it from here, I guess.
yeah.
And as we kind of alluded to last time, we talked about that eighth note subdivision at the very end of the last segment. And I'll just give a brief overview of how that kind of plays into this. But throughout pretty much the entirety of the song, minus the chorus, we have this constant eighth note stream going on the hi hat, even at the very beginning. It's constantly going, with it, which is nothing unusual compared to most drum parts you might hear. But it does contribute to kind of a unifying aspect of the bass part has eighth notes, the guitar part has eighth notes before it kicks in to play the riff. The hi-hat of the drum part has eighth notes. It's this unifying concept of continuing to keep this motion going throughout the entire song, which contributes to its feeling of continuously chugging along. Now, past that point, one of the things we did talk about was we talked about basically the verse as a section and the chorus as a section. And here's the part where Turn It On Again gets really interesting. It flips time signatures a lot for a song that sounds like a relatively simple pop progressive rock tune. And that's kind of the genius of the song itself. The verse, as we get into the first one, actually winds up flipping time signatures every other bar. Or if you wanted to view it as one way, it could be one large time signature. But essentially, what we're looking at is we have a bar of 6/4 and a bar of 7/4, which means we have one bar with six beats or six quarter notes in one measure, and another bar with seven quarter notes in that measure. And the way that kind of manifests, which makes this sound easier than it actually is when you actually see how it's counted, is that the pattern is basically a standard drum pattern of beats 1 and 3 on the bass drum and 2 and 4 on the snare drum with eighth notes on the hi-hat. Basically, this pattern you hear in a lot of rock tunes. Which is fairly straightforward. Now, what we do here is we kind of adapt that into the 6/4 and the 7/4. The concept of that beat right there can be pretty easily fit into 6/4. You just take a bar of 4 and add an extra half to it, which is pretty easy because you're just adding this onto the back of it. So you get this 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Pretty easy stuff. Now, where this gets a little bit more complicated is in the next bar, which is the 7/4, where we play what we just played, but there's a little turnaround on the end that adds that extra beat, that extra quarter note's worth of space. So let me play that 7/4 bar, because what we're looking at is basically this. And what's at the end there is basically 3 hits on the bass drum, 7 and 1 is basically that count with this. That's just a little turnaround. It's a little momentum breaker, but it serves to just keep that momentum constantly going. So when you put it all together, I'm going to play this slowly while counting. Here's what you get. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 1 and 2. Now, all together at tempo, that sounds something like this. Essentially. So that is basically what the verse and the, I guess what I'll call refrain at the end of the song is built out of, that constant mixture of 6/4 and 7/4. On the other hand, and as a matter of fact, Danton, real quick, if you wouldn't mind, it would be great if you could get a chance to play that verse 4 so we can take a listen to hearing that drum beat in the song itself.
Yeah, let's hear that in context. So I just pulled up another quick little tidbit for all you teachers out there. A really safe bet when you're pulling up songs on YouTube for your kids for online lessons. It's always good to search for lyrics. That way, music videos constantly have like all sorts of extra fluff and time space. So getting a lyric video is really great. So this is from the channel Amy Lauren. Here it is. Turn it on again with the lyrics. I'm skipping right to 35 seconds where that verse starts so you could hear the patterns that Russ just played in the context of what's happening with the rest of the band. So let's listen to that. So you can hear it right there. It went through the whole progression twice, basically. So, yeah.
Exactly. And as you listen to it, it does this really great job of drawing a straight line through the beat and through the song, which is one thing I find that kind of sets apart uh, some artists from others who came from the prog era. Some of them could write music where it was complicated sounding, even though it's an easier tune, and others were able to weave complicated concepts but keep them simple sound, which is a real talent as a songwriter. It takes a lot to take a concept of like, okay, let's write a standard pop tune and have it in 6/4 and 7/4 alternating, and let's make it sound like it's 4/4 the entire time. Which
Yeah,
is fun.
unless you're really trying to count along, most average listeners won't even notice that there are these various time signature changes. It's really, really interesting.
Right. And another band that does a great job of this, and I've talked about this in the past, another band that does a real good job of this is Rush as well. Their 80s catalog is full of songs that wind up having odd time signatures alternating or throughout the song, but it sounds like there's a straight line throughout, which is a really good concept in songwriting. Now,
And
before I
let
get
me
too far
ask
into
you
that,
really quick, off the top of your head, how many of those songs are made to sound that way by use of that steady eighth note stream in the drum part or in the other instruments?
for any particular band or for Genesis in general?
Well, let's say for Genesis and for Rush, like all the songs that sound like they fit that bill of four, even if they're not. How much of that is attributed to steady eighth note streams in the
I
rhythm?
would say I would say a good bit of it definitely. I can think of a few songs off the top of my head for either Rush or Genesis that are examples of that. So, for example, "Turn It On Again" is a good example of that. But even in their previous album, which was called "And Then There Were Three," the first band that they were a three-piece, there's a song called "Down and Out," which is in 5/4, but constantly keeps this constant eighth note going on in the drum part, which keeps that momentum moving. Or, for example, with Rush, one of the best examples of that is "Free Will" from the Permanent Waves album from 1980. I'm a little fuzzy on the time signatures. I believe it is 5/4, then 6/4. I believe altogether it's like a bar of 11 when all's said and done. But the way it's put together, it just sounds like it's drawing a straight line through. And I believe for most of them, that stopped somewhere around like 82, 83 writing songs that would pull that kind of trick. But right in that turn of like 79 to 80, there were a few bands that were able to do that and do it well and make it easy to follow, which is impressive to me.
Yeah, cool. So let's move on to the chorus in Turn It On Again and talk about what's going on there. It's another interesting kind of rhythmic tidbit here that gets a little bit more fun.
Right. And so the funny part is that right before we get to the chorus in the section that we talked about before, which is the slash chord, the D over C, we switch back to 4/4 and continually keep that part going until we hit the chorus. When we get to the chorus, we're still in 4/4, but we split it up into this weird hemiola of two bars of three and a bar of two, essentially, where we're counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then it feels like we're back in four. So what we're looking at there is a part that sounds like this. Now, what you may have noticed there is that towards the end, bucked that trend of 3-3-2 a little bit and added an extra 3 and an extra 2 at the end there. Kind of bringing us back to the total number of counts we had between the 6/4 and 7/4 of 13 beats. So 3-3-3 and 2-2, which would be 9 plus 4, is 13. Because this is math class now. No. So essentially what it is that you see this means of the accents kind of driving where the drum beat goes. And not only that, but also the keyboard parts, specifically the bass part for the synth bass and the guitar as well. And we wind up having this overarching concept that leads us through with a straight line through kind of rough territory, really. And as you notice, those crashes aren't 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. They're not. The first one is on the downbeat, but the others are on the end of 3 right before the next bar, essentially. So we're looking at. Looking at 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2. And that's kind of how the counting goes with that. Now, I'm going to play that all together again so you can hear that and kind of keep that count in mind. Then we're going to take a listen to it from the song. So here's the chorus. Maestro, if you would.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention real quick. It might seem a little silly that we're making such a big deal out of something that on the surface level seems so rudimentary as adding 9 and 4, but really looking at any piece of popular music, anything that's more than simply 4 beats can really be quite complicated for a musician. And so many, my piano kids in their lesson books doing songs that at most have 4 beats or 3 or 2, never any kind of combinations or changes of time signature. This kind of stuff is really unusual, at least until you get into progressive rock. So that sort of pattern becomes a lot more difficult, and the best way to do it is just exactly as Russ just did, of breaking it down into smaller bits of 3s and 2s and finding a really solid way to put all that together. And you'll notice by just doing the 3-3-2 makes a total of 8. So you could argue that fitting that 8-beat pattern instead of a bar of 3, a bar of 3, a bar of 2 could fit bars of 4 with various other beats of the measures syncopated or emphasized. But it's usually easier to think of it as 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a little bit more convoluted, but it definitely makes playing the nature of that drum pattern so much easier. So let's listen to what Russ just played in the context of what it sounds like in the actual song. So I'm going to go back to my little YouTube video here, and we're going to listen to it real quick. And there we are. We're back at the verse.
All right. So one of the things I hope you can see from that is that, out of a song that really kind of comes across as not terribly difficult sounding, there's some pretty interesting concepts here, not only for piano in terms of mode mixture, in terms of chord choice, in terms of voice leading, but also when it comes time for the rhythmic aspect of it as well, in terms of odd time signatures and how they work together, how you count them, and how you can draw a straight line through them with the choices you make as to what beat you're using to play.
Yeah,
So,
not to mention syncopation too. How many of the downbeats as opposed to your upbeats you're using. And in this example in the chorus, once again, landing on 1, but then on the and of 3 instead of on 3. Things like that can also be really, really effective tools to generating that momentum and creating a lot of interesting textures in your writing as a band.
and as a tail end to something, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. It's a great idea for writing a part, and it really adds something to it. One of the percussionists who I'm a big fan of, who had a great way of thinking about this, was Stuart Copeland of the Police, their drummer. And one of the things he talked about was that many times you don't need to have some ridiculously complicated beat. He put it in the context of saying a lot of modern drummers aren't necessarily satisfied with playing just a regular beat and constantly keeping that going without having to add extra things to it. But as you can see here, it's not a terribly complicated beat from a drummer with a pretty strong reputation as a good drummer with Phil Collins. And just by use of syncopation, by use of splitting time signatures into smaller patterns, you can take what sounds relatively simple and make it have so much more use in terms of making it sound more complex, making it work well with the music. And not everything has to be constantly spamming double bass notes all the time, much to my own.
Yeah, so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. As always with our bits on pieces, we hope you got something out of this. You know, whether you're a teacher looking for some new content to introduce to your students, or new ways to talk about this content, or if you're a student looking to learn how to play these sorts of pieces, you know, hearing teachers talk about it, I think can sometimes be helpful for breaking it all down. So stay tuned for more content to come. We're gonna try to keep a pretty nice rotation here of lots of different music, of lots of different styles. We're gonna be doing plenty of rock stuff, plenty of movie tunes, video game music, classical pieces, all that sort of stuff. We're going to try and cover, cast as big of a net as we can. So, those that are following, you know, we appreciate you sticking with us on our journey, and stay tuned for more content to come.